Okay, good afternoon, good morning, almost to the afternoon, everyone. Great to have you here. Thanks very much for coming. I know we've got lots of people online as well, so thanks very much for coming to this town hall, which is focused on sustainability and social responsibility. My name is Duncan Ivison, President and Vice Chancellor. I've been joined by three wonderful colleagues who I'll ask to introduce themselves in a minute. Just to explain the format, if you came to the session we had on strategy a few weeks ago, it's a similar format to that. So I guess the idea is I want us to be drawing on our university expertise wherever we can. So at the last town hall we had Mabel and Mark, who are experts in sort of strategy and strategy design and innovation, sort of have a discussion about whether we were getting it right in terms of where we are in the strategy process. And today we're going to talk about sustainability and social responsibility. And again, we're going to ask Julia, Mike, and Carla to sort of help us understand not just the importance of sustainability, but how do we make sure it's really embedded in our strategy in the way that it should be, given I know the deep commitment we all have to it. And I have to say, coming out of the first phase of the strategy, it's really clear how important our sustainability, our approach to sustainability is for the entire university community, and also especially for our students. Not surprisingly, it's a consistent theme in all my discussions with students about just how important the university's commitment to sustainability is. And even more interestingly, more and more students look at our credibility in relation to sustainability as a reason for whether they'll come and study with us. We know this is increasingly true, not only for international students, for domestic students as well. I actually really welcome that, because I think that's a fantastic challenge, but also opportunity for us to attract those kinds of students. And increasingly that's becoming more and more important for them, as well it should, given we're wrecking their world essentially. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the colleagues to introduce themselves, and then we're just going to have some general questions, have a bit of a discussion between ourselves for maybe 20 or so minutes, roughly, just looking at Jules, and then we'll just open it up. People online can either submit questions or comments through Menti, or I think put up your hand and we'll unmute you and take your questions there. We'll have questions in the room. Inevitably, we will not get through all the questions, but we will capture all the questions and we will respond to them. Either what we did last time for the strategy review was do a podcast afterwards with Mabel and Mark and myself, and we work through the questions in that format. We might try that again for this one, but we will get through all the questions. All the questions are indeed being gathered up. So without Julia, do you want to kick off and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everybody. My name's Julia Durkin, and I'm the head of environmental sustainability. So it's my role to oversee the implementation of the university's environmental sustainability strategy, which sets out how we're going to tackle the climate and nature crises across our three core goals and our operations. So in particular, I'm responsible for embedding sustainability within our operations, for delivering on our zero carbon pathway, and for engaging with our communities to achieve our sustainability commitments.
Good, thanks. Carly.
I'm Carly McLaughlin. I'm Professor of Climate and Energy Policy, and I also lead the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research here. And I am also the academic lead for carbon, which means I have responsibility around our operational carbon, and I work really closely with Julia on the topics she's just listed, with a particular focus on our carbon emissions, to try and make sure that we're on track for meeting those targets.
My name is Mike Shaver. So I'm Director of Sustainable Futures, which is our overarching or underpinning, depending on where you want to put it, research platform covering all of environmental sustainability. In terms of my research, I'm also director of what's called the Sustainable Materials Innovation Hub, which really looks at waste management practices and circularity and material flows to try and improve the sustainability of that.
Great, thank you very much. So it's a fantastic panel. So the first question from me, and it's a chance for you guys to sort of reflect on it as well, is what are our sort of core sustainability commitments? I mean, maybe Carly and Julia will start with you on this, and Mike can obviously jump in as well. And how close are we to actually getting there? I mean, there's some exciting stuff, but it's a big challenge, right?
Absolutely. So one of our key commitments is to reduce our Scope 1 and 2 emissions to zero by 2038.
What do those mean, by the way, the Scope 1 and 2?
Yeah, and within our carbon budget. So the majority of our Scope 1 and 2 emissions are from our buildings and how they operate, so the heating, the lighting, the equipment that we use. And then that other bit that I just said about within our carbon budget. So our carbon budget is the fair share of carbon emissions that we can emit if we are to keep global warming within 1.5 degrees. So that's one of our big commitments. How are we doing against it? So we have a plan that we've put in place that has been sort of regarded across the sector, and we've secured some funding. So at the moment, that's around £175 million. We've recently introduced a corporate power purchase agreement. So this is seeing the construction of a brand new solar farm, and that will deliver around 65% of our energy demand. So what's really important about that project is that we're creating a new source of renewable energy into the grid, and we're not just taking a share of what's already there. Which is really positive. So testing is underway for that at the moment, and it should be online, and we should start being able to purchase energy from there later this year. And that's going to reduce our carbon emissions by around 25%, which is huge. So that's one of our really big projects. And then the other things that we've been doing is trying to remove fossil fuel heating from our buildings and make them more energy efficient. So our phase 1 projects include Booth Street East. So that's our first zero carbon in operation building. And we've also done a couple of other residential buildings as well. And in terms of energy efficiency projects, we've been rolling out LED lighting across the campus and also optimizing heating, ventilation and air conditioning to enable it to operate more efficiently and improving sort of the fabric of our buildings to improve insulation. And then sort of we know that we need to address our big heat networks. So they account for about 50% of our carbon emissions. And we are undertaking a study at the moment to look at how we can do that. So these networks provide heating and hot water to a lot of buildings, and we need to investigate different technologies that are going to provide the right amount of energy to do this. So we are looking at open loop ground source heat pumps, sewer source heat pumps, so taking the heat from the big underground sewers in Manchester, and also deep geothermal, so digging a couple of kilometres into the ground and harnessing that thermal energy. So, like I said, we're very much at sort of the beginning stages of this and these feasibility studies. But we do think, we're sort of cautiously optimistic, I think, that these can provide that transformational change that we need.
How much, like what percentage of our carbon sort of footprint would be reduced, say, if we get the geothermal right?
50%.
50%, so it's a big one.
So half. And I think, that would enable us to meet our zero carbon by 2038 target.
Right.
And just on that as well, in terms of our carbon budget, so at the moment we're projecting we will sort of exceed that by around 30% based on the current pipeline and decarbonising those heat networks. But I think it's important that we try and keep as close to that target as possible. That's the science-based target that our climate scientists in the Tyndall Centre have set. So it's not about changing it, but trying to keep as close to it as possible.
So Carly, do you want to maybe, and I'll bring Mike in a second, I mean, are we on the right track, do you think? Have we got the right plan, or are there things that, is the crunch going to come? Like, what's your kind of assessment of where we are?
Yeah, sure. So I think that point about the carbon budget versus the date that you get to net zero. So you'll see like people announcing these dates for net zero, and there was a fashion at one point for them just to get earlier and earlier. And I used to joke at one point that they would end up being in the past, and then I actually did go to something where someone said theirs was in the past. That gives us like a big kind of framing and direction. But the carbon budget, which is how much carbon you emit on the way to getting to zero, that's what matters for how much the climate then warms. And it's, you know, being honest about where we've got to, like we were too slow to get going on that target. You know, we adopted it in about 2019, and it took us too long to really get to the idea that this required total transformation of how we did things. I think what's really good is that in the last, say, 5 years, that has then started to change. And now I think we're in a much better place. So, you know, 175 million for decarbonising the campus. It isn't as much as the plan says we need, but it's a huge amount of investment that we absolutely did not have when we first, you know, took this target, and we didn't have a plan for meeting it. So I think the key thing now is that we make sure that we hold ourselves to account on that. You know, we've got that money. We need to make sure that we're spending it in a timely fashion, that we're doing that really effectively, that we're reviewing the impact of those projects, making sure we learn about the next project and make that even better. So the budget is good, particularly for keeping that level of ambition high. So we never get too kind of like patting ourselves on the back about us slowly getting towards 2038. Like, we need to get to 2038 rapidly. And we've got, you know, a big chunk of funding there to do that. So we need to make sure that we actually deploy that and get moving on it. I suppose another area that Julia didn't flag, because I said I would, is around our aviation emissions target. So we set a target of reducing that to 50% of pre-pandemic levels, with the idea that, like, the world has changed post-pandemic, and how we do things is different. There's much more kind of virtual engagement. And so initially we were kind of doing okay with that, but I think, as expected, there's been a bit of pent-up demand there, and now we aren't doing as well against that, so it's about 34%. So we need...
34% of pre-pandemic...
No, so we've cut it by 34 rather than cutting it by
50. Okay, sorry, good. Okay.
Is that right? Yeah, thanks. So we need to, that's a priority for this year, for us to look again at that and sort of, you know, work with colleagues so that we can do all the brilliant, impactful things that we do in different ways to make them lower carbon. So it's not about saying that we're not flying at all, but it's about thinking how often and in what ways and for what things we travel.
Good. I mean, Mike, I wanted to get you to think about what we need to do in the future, but just given your research interest, especially in the sort of circular economy, I mean, are we doing enough in terms of our own internal circular economy? Is there stuff we could be doing more of, or any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think one of the really important things that we all realize is that sustainability is a lot more than carbon. And carbon has an urgency to it and almost a topical sense, because it's talked about across all different circles. But if we don't solve the rest of those environmental problems, if we don't solve the unintended consequences of a switch in energy technologies, or a switch in switching away from air travel to something else, we deal with a lot of changes which might be impacting water, or critical mineral access, or plastic circularity, or waste management that we're missing. And so I think having a community of people with really different expertise across the university allows us to take not just science-based carbon targets, but also science-based inputs in terms of everything to do with circularity. So if you were to look at our catering provision, that has changed dramatically in terms of the amount of single-use items which are provided. We've revamped and launched schemes to be able to use reusable coffee cups, even when you forget your own reusable coffee cup. And I think that those efforts are at the nascent stage. We still could do more. And one of the other challenges is that a lot of what we do in that space is influencing national legislation. So the simpler recycling policy that is emerging, well, that then is creating an obligation on us to do better. And we absolutely know what we want to do. We want to start collecting food waste on campus. We want to be able to recycle things other than bottles. And that stuff is coming, but the lag time between policy and implementation is slower than I think I wanted.
Yeah. So just staying with you for a second, Mike, and then Carly and Julia jump in. I mean, so as I said at the beginning, we are sort of writing this new strategy, and as I said, a big theme coming through the consultations is the importance of sustainability. I mean, how do we make sure? I mean, it sounds like we're making progress, right? And we've got some gaps to close, and they're quite challenging. But as Carly said, the pace the cadence is picking up. I mean, how do we make sure we embed sustainability in the strategy in the right way? So from your perspective, whether it's research, you're involved in the platform, et cetera, but from your perspective, what does success look like in that way?
Well, I think the first thing to recognize is that the definition of sustainability is really complex and murky.
Yeah.
When we first had meetings to create Sustainable Futures as a platform, some of the most contentious meetings that I had with brilliant colleagues about what does the word environment mean and what does the word sustainability mean? But actually where our strength is, where our USP is as a university, is we are the university who understands that murkiness and that messiness, right? And being able to do that gives you a much more nuanced picture of what a sustainable future would look like, but also really understanding the trade-offs that we're going to need to make in the future. And so I think that success for me from a research perspective is that there's a continued prioritization of a really diverse array of environmentally sustainable research. And that means research on environmental challenges that is socially sustainable, economically sustainable, and environmentally sustainable. And that diversity is connected into what we do so that we can use that knowledge. We can find the expert in geothermal engineering to be, let's be world leading in this space and be really informed by what we do. I would say what we need in this strategy is a more joined up approach. There are so many people at this university who are really passionate about their bit of, or in general, environmental sustainability. But because of that, we have all these different myriad of structures which we then have to go and really join up better. And I think that connectivity is going to add so much more value as sort of, if we get to the point where one Manchester has that as a key thread, that belief, that sense of purpose of environmental sustainability is going to ring true and be a lot more authentic.
Right, good. No, thanks. Carly, from your perspective, what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, so I suppose drawing on work that we do around other organisations looking to transform their practice, I think asking ourselves the question of is sustainability in the room for all of these discussions around priorities and all of the things that we say are important to us as an institution, and how do we make that happen? I think often because it's a kind of a topic that we might all read a bit about and talk with our friends about and things, there's a sense that we all kind of get it, and I think we need to check in on that. Do we have a shared sort of knowledge, the shared skills at all levels of the organisation to be able to execute the strategy in a way that has sustainability right at its heart? And I would probably, I think if you can do that in the strategy so that it's really clear there, but then as it starts to be delivered through different directorates, through different faculties, what is the decision-making process that means that we're always taking it into account? And it's not like some poor person who's the environmental champion's job to try and force that in, but actually we get to a position where it's felt to be everybody's responsibility. The role of things like champions and leaders is essential in getting us there, but the successful approach would end up being that we don't really need that, because everybody is understanding it, everybody is executing it, and then when we need really specialist help, we can go out to our colleagues, whether that's in the environmental sustainability team or specific colleagues with that area of expertise. But that embedding needs a lot of thought to make it more than just something we say in a glossy document, but then we just revert to how we always did stuff.
Yeah, good. Julia, what does it look like for you?
So I suppose picking up a little bit on both of what Mike and Carly have said, that this recognition that sustainability is more than just accelerating this transition to net zero, and it's about protecting and restoring nature and also adapting to the unavoidable impacts of climate change to ensure that long-term resilience. And I think there needs to be discussions around, what does prosperity, healthy ecosystems, vibrant communities look like against the backdrop of climate change and intensifying extreme weather events, and how is that going to impact on the university and our operations? So sort of drawing that all together and having that really sort of bold vision for sustainability and putting, for me anyway, nature and carbon on a par is really important. And then sort of what Carly was saying having climate and nature at the heart of policy development and decision making, and enabling sustainability to be embedded across all aspects of the university, from our research, teaching, the way the campus operates, and the way that sort of the community behaves more widely. And then just sort of finally, like, empowering our people and our communities to be able to take that action in the way that is relevant to them, that feels meaningful in their jobs and in their sort of day-to-day lives.
Good. Okay, fantastic. I mean, it's a great set of challenges, and I think the point that you've all made is about the need. I mean, carbon's critical, and there's urgency to it, as Mike said, but thinking about nature and carbon alongside each other and the different dimensions of the problem, the messiness of the problem, I think is a really powerful comment. And yeah, the embedding it in the decision-making process, yeah, we'll keep talking about that, because that's the big one, right? How do we do that, including the trade-offs that inevitably then emerge? Okay, so let's open it up to questions now. We've got people online, and I'm going to ask Jules to just keep track of that. But why don't we start in the room, and then we'll go online. And just to remind people, we will answer every question we can today, but then also following up, we'll think about how we catch up with the questions we weren't able to tackle. So let me open it up in the room first. Yes. We just wait for a microphone so people can hear you online.
Dare I raise the question of Scope 3 emissions?
Good one. Good one. Yeah. Yeah. So Scope 3. These are the hardest ones. Who wants to start?
I can. So Scope 3 emissions account...
Just tell people what they are. Not everyone will know what they are.
They are indirect emissions. So the emissions that come from travel, that come from our investments, that come from the procurement of goods and services. So they account for around 90% of our emissions. So they're huge.
Wow.
And we're doing some work at the moment in my team to sort of do a bit of a materiality assessment, because there are a lot of different categories. There are a lot of things that we could tackle, but we really want to work with our stakeholders. We're having lots of conversations to understand what we can do, how we can do it, what are the sort of low-hanging fruit that we can do first to gain that momentum, and set some interim targets and get lots of different people involved in.
So examples, just like make it concrete.
So examples include reducing our emissions from commuting. So we've done some stuff around the travel plan recently to enable that. We've looked at some of the goods and services that we're buying through procurement. So some of the key ones are computer equipment, library resources. So really focusing in on what does that mean and how can we tackle that.
Quick comment from anyone else? You don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I would just add that, I wonder if you have a particular area of Scope 3 in mind. Do you?
It's just that it's
all of
such
it.
a huge agenda.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I mean, the travel of our international students is a really significant one. And I think that's where, that's a conversation about the whole business model of our university and the sector. And I think we should have that discussion, and we should be transparent about our decisions in places like that.
What is the number connected to that?
So 37% of our Scope 3 emissions are from student travel.
Yeah.
So I think it's just really important to, again, look beyond carbon and thinking about something like equity, right? And so we could bring in students from all over the world who are exposed to this magical university. I mean, obviously I don't have a Manc accent, so I'm not from here. And you learn things, and you're exposed to things, and you become better, and your understanding of sustainability is nuanced. And so I think it would just be really sad to not recognize the value of that travel, right? And that, I think, is that really complicated conversation about sustainability beyond carbon and the messiness that we've talked about is there's so much value to the things we do. And it's about really embedding that conversation about carbon in the choices that we make to make sure that we're making the most value out of the travel we do.
So it could be that some of those students go back and do remarkable things in their countries or wherever they end up, that actually contribute in other ways. So we need to, that's part of the messiness, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's exactly the point I was making. So that's the conversation to have. And I think that's an area where an institution like ours surely has to argue that that's a really good use of carbon, because to come to Manchester and get a degree here is a life-changing experience. But I think the problem is that sometimes when there's a really big source of carbon, sorry, I'm a carbon person. I can feel you flinch every time I say it. I think sometimes when there's a really big source, we sort of like don't talk about it. And that's what I mean. We just shouldn't do that. We should be like, yeah, we know that that's really big, and this is why it's big. These are the things we can maybe do about it, but actually, for these reasons, that's why it's there. And let's be super transparent about that across all the areas of Scope 3 emissions. So like another one is pensions, for example, where we can influence either pensions that we directly control or ones where we are a very significant part of the membership of pensions. Like that's a big area of influence we could potentially have. We'd have to think a bit differently about particularly those areas where we don't directly control the investments to make a difference there.
Okay, I just want to make sure we get through the question. We've got someone online, do we?
Yeah, we've got 2 hands up online,
Okay.
and I think Barty was first, so if we could unmute Barty, please.
Okay. Hi, Barty.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes,
We
go
can.
ahead. We can hear
Awesome. So a couple of things here. So I'm really very happy to hear so many projects going on for the sustainability. And then, so can I just ask if I've missed out that are we doing rainwater harvesting, because we get so much rain here in the UK, and can we are we doing that already? If not, then can we do that and we can utilize in all our wherever the water supplies is there, so we can use wherever a recycled one? That is one question. Second is, what about the whole, our cafeterias and our the catering everywhere? How much percentage we can go towards veganism? Because that's a big, I know it all depends on how many people want to be vegan or not, but then if we provide like vegan food, that would be at least we are producing less. We are producing any less impact on, like, because we all know that livestock produce methane emissions. So these are the 2 things which I wanted to ask.
So rain harvesting and veganism, and having moved here from Australia, I love all the water, and I'm enjoying all the water, but but yeah, and then veganism, I think it's a fantastic challenge and wonderful question. So maybe we'll start with you, Julia, and then...
Yeah, so we are collecting some water, but we can definitely collect more. I think some of the challenge is around space. So where can we put our rainwater collection? And how do we do that? But we do have, within our construction and refurbishment projects, guidelines and guidance encouraging all of them to think about how this can be incorporated within those projects. And then working more with our landscaping team as well. How can we collect more water? Because we know that it's going to get drier and hotter in the summer. And, you know, water will probably get more expensive as that happens to balance that demand. So, yeah, great question, and we can definitely do more about that.
Maybe just a quick additional comment on rain harvesting or veganism?
I can do a quick on veganism. So, I mean, I think we have quite a progressive catering team that really seeks to take best practice. And so the leadership in that function is really trying to do the best. What I would say is that when we've done a lot of social sustainability work, and this is led by Helen Holmes, who's actually the deputy director, it's really true that if you try and push something onto a community, it almost has a backlash effect. And so what we want to do is to make the vegan and vegetarian options the most obvious, the easiest to access, and rather than saying, okay, well, you're banning this, which would have a backlash, you're almost making it the easiest option to do. And we've seen a huge uptick in terms of catering that is ordered and purchases that are made towards vegetarian and vegan options. So again, there's more that we could always do, but I think this is a step towards it, where there's been a big shift already towards certainly vegetarianism and then veganism, depending on the processing. You and I can talk about the carbon footprint of that for a long time, if we won't today.
Good. Okay, let's take a question in the room, then we'll go back. Yes. We'll just wait for the microphone.
2 questions about embedding sustainability into our educational offer. One is, Should we, how could we ensure that every student that comes to University of Manchester or through the University of Manchester learns a basic framework of sustainability? And the other is, I think I really commend the environmental sustainability team on what you've been doing around signposting. And I think we shouldn't forget the pedagogy of place. It isn't just to do it, but to actually make sure that people are really clear when they're walking around that this is a rainwater tank and this saves so many litres and water. And so I think we're already doing a good job, but let's not lose sight of that as well, because that's not just, that's our students seeing it, but it's also everybody who walks through this campus seeing it.
So maybe Carly and Mike, in terms of embedding it in the curriculum, we're having a great discussion about sort of the potential of service learning becoming a core part of our curricula for every single student at the university. What can we do in the sustainability space?
Yeah. So if I just start, so this is something that the Sustainable Futures platform believes a lot in, right? And I think that platforms blurring that research element into teaching is really important, and actually taking teaching into research as well. And so we have, I guess, what is a skills function led by Jen O'Brien, but actually is really championing approach of what we call sustainability primers. So really short courses, which are perspectives on different sustainability issues. But then following on from that, a lot of reflective learning. So the ability to not just listen to some talking head expert do things, but actually just say, well, how does water security, how does land use impact on my individual PhD or my undergraduate course? So we're trying to develop this for continuous professional development first, and then the idea is to try and roll that out to our PhD students. But I know that there's parallel efforts to try and develop even shorter courses for our undergraduate students. But absolutely agree with you. I think this is something which every single one of our students should understand the importance and the messiness of these sustainability issues.
Carly, do you want to say?
Yeah, I suppose just, and particularly that bit about them being able to reflect on the importance of that for their own course. So there's so many different layers to this. You know, there's something we could give out that's standardized, but then also making sure that every program is thinking about how you embed it within, you know, sort of the professional practice side of whatever you're doing, so that our graduates have this in a context-specific way as well. But yeah, I think there's loads going on in this space, but as it sort of gets more finalised, we need to make sure we're communicating that really well with colleagues, because there's you know, like yourself, Joe, people who have worked on all this stuff for a long time, making sure that everybody understands what's happening and where they can signpost people to and things like that.
And this connectivity, right? Like there's so much stuff that we do, which we actually don't know about because it's not joined up. And that I think is I think a real opportunity for the 2035 strategy.
Yeah. Good. Is it a Menti question, or we'll take one online? What should we do, the Menti thing?
We have plenty of Menti questions. I'm going to take them in kind of order of top questions.
Yep.
So maybe we do one Menti and then there's some hands up online as well, so we could do that as well. So the most upvoted question: does any of the panel know if there's a web page with all the environment-related volunteering we could take part in on campus to help out if we want to? So I'd love to share this with my team.
So a question about whether there's one web page where we can find out opportunities for environmental volunteering.
So there's the Volunteering Hub, which is a more student-focused hub, which has lots of information on. And then I think there is a bit of a gap here. So my team is actually working on an online engagement platform at the moment that will become like a one-stop shop for all the events, for all the actions that people can take, for all the engagement opportunities. So we can start having that information easily shareable, and also sort of to be able to measure impact and share best practice and celebrate success and kind of keep that momentum going. So yeah. Yeah,
I mean, our website is woeful. So we are doing some work on that. So I think we need to think about the opportunity of how we use our kind of digital platforms to do some of the knitting and integrating. And right now we can't because we don't have the right framework for that. But good. So why don't we do another question online, and then we'll come back to the room. So who's next in the queue?
Yeah, Imogen had her hand up next. So
hi, Imogen.
Hello. Sorry, I've just opened my camera. Thank you all for sharing all the initiatives you got ongoing. I think they all sound great. I think my question might also be on the Mentimeter. And it's kind of to do with what you were saying, Mike, in terms of the complex and murkiness of sustainability. And this one goes into the kind of scope 3. So sorry for bringing up AI as it's such a buzzword at the moment, but I was wondering if there's any considerations for how AI is contributing to energy usage, water usage, minerals, and if there's any ongoing research for that, because I've seen the recent AI policy and there's not really consideration of, I don't know, ideas telling how to sustainably use that kind of
Thanks,
media.
Imogen. Great question. So, Mike, you want?
Yeah, no, this is an exciting topic. Thank you very much for the question. So I think there's two really important things on AI. And so on the back of that policy, we've held a few meetings, again, co-organized by the Energy Beacon and Sustainable Futures and some other teams, and Digital Futures, which really focus on two things. So one is, how can AI be used for sustainability, right? And so that could be, can you use AI to quicken how quickly we can do life cycle assessments, or can you use AI to better understand land use and mitigate environmental disasters or control flooding? And then there is, I think, what you're asking about, which is how can you minimize the footprint of AI? There's active research in both of those spaces. Again, this idea of joined up approaches, we certainly could be doing more. But last year, one of the things that we have at this university, which is great, is UMRI. I never remember what that's called, but it's a way for us to seed corn fund some really interesting stuff. And two of the recent projects that we've done is both on the footprint of satellites, right? So how do we make more sustainable satellites which deal with our communications, and then computing. And so it's an active area where we are doing research, and an active area where in the future we'll be embedding that into our practice.
Yeah, and Imogen, we have, you might have seen me refer to it in a recent President's Message thing. So we have a kind of AI skunkworks group that Chris Taylor is leading. And AI sustainability is going to be a core part of that. And in fact, I think Chris is setting up a working group with Professor Carolyn J, to lead that work. So it's high on the priority list for our future thinking about AI as an institution, because frankly, the tech industry isn't. I mean, they're thinking of buying nuclear power stations or moving to Mars. And then we are also trying, I know there are efforts to try and think about how we power our AI infrastructure that we might use in addition to our high performance computing from data centers that are themselves committed to more sustainable sources of energy. So I think this is going to be huge, because AI is just going to become even more pervasive than it is, and it is an incredibly greedy carbon thing. It uses a lot of water as well. In all kinds of ways. Data centers consume vast amounts of water, so we need to have a really coherent approach to that. But as you said, Mike, there's some great expertise, but also some good organizational energy, green energy mobilizing around it. So good. Okay, why don't we take a question in the room? Yeah, we'll just wait for the microphone.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about another element of Scope 3 emissions. So investments in pensions were mentioned earlier, but I'd also like to ask about how the university can use its role in which organizations and companies it affiliates with. So I saw an example in the Mentimeter was BAE Systems, which has been contributing to social and environmental devastation in Gaza. So I guess my question would be, how can the university leverage its position to impact other universities and also organizations that it works with by setting some red lines in terms of our social and environmental responsibilities?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I mean, we do have a sustainability framework for our kind of investment portfolio and the managers who we use to manage that portfolio, and that has an overall, that has a kind of carbon target to it, which we are, in fact, hitting. I mean, insofar as that is a relevant indicator. I think also it's about our credibility as an institution around sustainability in terms of the research and teaching and our commitment to it in our kind of organizational activity. I mean, in relation to any particular company, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a debate about the extent to which, one company or a group of companies represents a particularly problematic aspect of our work, and that includes the partnerships we have. So we do have partnerships. We do have a partnership with BAE Systems. I mean, it's not a company that we get huge amounts of funding from, but we do have colleagues who work with them. We do have students who engage with them. And, the debate we've had in the university, both before I came and since I've arrived, is that for the time being, that relationship is one that, we're not going to step away from, but we are aware of the concerns around at least that particular company. But, in general, we have a very clear commitment to reducing the carbon footprint of our investment portfolio. That is a very clear commitment. And my guess is that will change and evolve over time as well. We'll continue to debate, no doubt, and agree and disagree about particular relationships we might have. But we also are seeing some really exciting new partnerships. I mean, Mike is part of a really exciting new partnership, for example, we have with Bupa, which has a real focus, for example, on the environmental sustainability of certain clinical environments and clinical practices. And they have millions of patients and encounters and vast amounts of clinical services. So there's all kinds of ways we can think about our partnership activity, and this is something we need to think about in the strategy, because partnership is a big theme in the strategy. How do we increase, I guess, our impact around the sustainability agenda through the partners we work with? Can we do more in that space? Can we actually make that, a kind of core principle of our next strategy? So look, it's a good question. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. Or...
Well, I think if you take a new structure like Unit M, right, where this is really about building up these new partnerships, if it has a mandate to go after ones where we can really make a sustainability difference, and that means partnerships with companies who have that as a desire, they want to become more sustainable, and companies who are sustainable. I mean, we're setting, Julia talked before about the solar farm project, right? Well, we've reached out to the solar farm people and be like, this is a living lab. How can we go and help this solar farm become more sustainable in the future? I think if we prioritize the opportunities to build our strategic partnerships around sustainability, that I think will give lots of researchers the opportunity to do that research and in a way make our other relationships less relevant. And if that then changes the debate in the future, that's fantastic. But I think our focus is on building the right partnerships in the future.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's go to a question online. Have we got a hand up online, or?
We have a hand up online and a few more Menti questions. So
okay,
maybe if I go for a Menti question and then we'll take the hand online. How do we balance our sustainability commitments with our internationalization agenda?
Yeah. Harley, do you want to?
Yeah,
you mentioned international students.
I think there's loads of scope there because, okay, so I'm not an internationalization person, but I think we haven't yet had the sort of real cross-cutting conversations as an institution about how we do internationalization in a much lower carbon way. There's all these positive impacts of working with people around the world, but we found out through COVID that you could do loads of that without traveling. And I think we need to make sure that we're really challenging like ways of working there and assumed ways of doing things. And so I think you could do it in a much more efficient way while still saying that internationalization is super important. But I also think it gives the opportunity, as well as loads of stories during COVID of people who had maybe always kind of struggled to do international engagement work because it was only ever in person, and suddenly it was opened up through it being virtual. So there's real scope, I think, for us to think about how more of our colleagues could be engaged if it actively had that sort of virtual element. And I think it's about challenging how we communicate about some of these things. So you do still see things coming out where it's kind of, it's suggested that on an international PhD collaboration, there would be funding for like the PhD research, the PhD supervisors to travel, for example. But well, that might be there, but do we need to foreground that? Like, could we actually be saying, like, we found that there's examples of these working really effectively without that being needed? But if you can make a case for why there would be loads of added value, then there are funds for it. So I think we could do these things differently. And the other thing I'll just quickly say is, I still think there's a bit of a habit amongst my colleagues to go for these exploratory first meetings. And I suppose that's an area I would like to look at more. Like, could we do more exploring virtually, so that by the time we're taking humans somewhere, we know what we're talking about and we know that there's a really good connection, we've got the right people in the room, rather than colleagues coming back from like an international trip and saying, oh, you should really go and talk to these people. I feel like often we could have done that, a bit more of that. I know there's some being on the ground stuff that's super important, but like, I think we could do more of that ahead of time, and that would mean, like, from a strategy perspective, putting sustainability at the heart of our internationalization strategy.
Any other, Julia?
So we are working with the International Development Team on a sector-wide project called the Climate Action Barometer, and this is looking at sort of international education as a force for good, and also looking at the impact it is having on emissions. So working cross-sector, looking at, I don't think there's any easy answers, but if we can work collaboratively to sort of discuss this and see what the best practice out there is and to come up with solutions together, I think that's also a really positive way forward.
Working that cross-sector way, yeah, excellent. Okay, shall we go online? We've got a hand online, then we'll come back into the room.
Yeah, hand up from Simeon, please.
Hi. With regard to the discussion we've had, I think something that isn't there is this is all of our responsibility, right? And there seems to be some kind of discussion in the narrative that it isn't all of our responsibility and we don't all take it seriously, but we do actually. Environmental stuff is in the background of all the actions that staff are taking, and that probably needs to be there a little bit more. I'd like to hear from the panel why we wouldn't have something like environmental sustainability as a standing item on every agenda of every meeting. Why doesn't Senate talk about it? Why doesn't school boards talk about it? Why doesn't Department Fora talk about it? Why isn't it everywhere in everything we talk about? The other comment I'll make is, can we please have the Zoom chat enabled? I've put that comment in Menti. If it turns up, people could maybe vote on it to illustrate how important it is, because there's a whole host of related discussion around environment and our perceptions on it that could just be happening on Zoom right now, parallel to this, that will be really beneficial to empowering us all. But it can't be, because we're not able to use that. And the last point I'll make, and I'd like to understand why, is there are definitely very polluting behaviours that are allowed to perpetuate within the university. So I'll platform one. Why are members of the business school able to travel first class and use very polluting methods of transportation that the rest of us can't use, but it seems to be okay? Now, that's just one example. Others might exist. Can't we just stop that immediately? So, three things. Zoom, can we just have the chat enabled? Business school flights and the exceptionalism that shouldn't exist. And can we please platform sustainability and environment on every meeting we go to? Because it is in the background of every action we take.
Yeah,
Thank
okay. Thanks, Simeon. So the Zoom chat point, you wrote to me about that before, so that's on me, and we'll take that away, and we can use Padlets as well. I completely agree with you. How do we get lots of conversations going at the same time in these kinds of meetings? So it's a fair point. On the business school, let me take that offline. I mean, I'm not across all the detail of every travel approval scheme in the university, but let me take that offline. I'm not aware of that. Sustainability on every agenda, and just the general issue of responsibility. I don't know, maybe Mike or Carly, or in an academic context, that's a really interesting sort of question.
I really like the idea of it being everywhere, and it certainly needs to be more places than it is at the moment. I think the only thing we have to guard against that is the sort of tokenism of it. We just need to make sure that bit doesn't happen. So I think maybe working with all those different layers that you mentioned, Simeon, to sort of identify, what are the issues people want to talk about? Is there a person at that level who has responsibility for it? So, can you have your school lead for environmental sustainability at all those meetings so that they can report back and take things back? So I think it's a totally fair point, and we should be doing it. Let's make sure we do it really well, rather than anything on the environment, no. Like that's
Next
not
item,
yeah. We don't want that. We want to like make sure it's good. But I think it's a really sound suggestion.
Yeah, and Simeon, sorry, Mike, I'll just jump in. I mean, same thing with Senate. I mean, maybe we can think about how we get a regular sustainability conversation having at Senate. I'd be happy to work with the Senate on that. But sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
Well, so first of all, Simeon, nice cat. But I think in a broader sense, like embedding it, and if we have that in meetings, we have to have those mechanisms to connect out. So if there's something really interesting and thoughtful and meaningful that is talked about in all of those different meetings, how is that information tracked through? Because I think one of the things that I've noticed here is that it's really difficult to find best practice and then to integrate that best practice. We have 3 faculties which are each the size of a university. And that I think is the key to really, the embedding is important, but the linking and that connectivity is equally important.
And that repeats itself across many domains, not only in sustainability. It's true in teaching and learning as well. It's true in research as well. So it's a kind of organizational challenge we've got. Okay, let's go in the room now, and then we'll go back online. Yes. Just wait for a microphone.
Thank you. Another question on carbon, if I could. So there may be some carbon emissions that, for technical reasons or the equity trade-off reasons like international travel and the value it brings, that cannot be reduced to zero. And I wondered what the university's policy is on offsetting perhaps those emissions, and how do you avoid certain greenwashed schemes to do that?
Yeah, great question. Carly is our expert.
So our position is that we don't offset, and that's been like very clear for quite a long time now. There are a couple of exceptions to that. So some funders require that you offset the carbon of your project, and in those cases we've used a sort of sector-wide approach where there are verified offsets, removals, and a mix of types of those. My personal take is that we really run the risk of absolving ourselves of responsibility once you offset to zero. And that's when I was saying before about people being net zero in the past. It's because they've offset. It's not because they've transformed their entire energy and production system. It's because they've done the offsetting. How do you retain the pressure to keep getting emissions down if you've hit your net zero target? That being said, I know that loads of colleagues who work on nature-based solutions would like to see ways of us enhancing projects that improve nature. So, I think it's an area we could look to explore further. But what I would definitely advise against the idea that it's totally fine to do all of our business class international travel because we offset it. And if you look at the cost of the sort of most secure removals, they're very expensive. Now, I suppose if you go for those really expensive ones, then it might focus minds about where you would want to actually do a mitigation measure to get emissions down, rather than do the removal side of it. So, if we're going to hit net zero as a world, you're going to have some removals, aren't you? Because there are things that are emitting greenhouse gases. But whether that is something we need to be doing for the residual emissions from our energy consumption as we get it down to zero, I think a pathway down to zero is the way to go. And it would be a conversation for the things that you genuinely can't get emissions out of, like food, once it's become much more sustainable.
Okay, so we've got about 4 minutes left, and maybe I'll gather up a couple of questions and then for the panel and myself to respond to. So are there any hands up online?
No hands, but we've got quite a few more Menti questions.
Okay, why don't we grab a couple of those, and then we'll come back to the room.
So first one, if you could pick one new sustainability target or objective for the university, what would it be? Good one.
Okay, so what new sustainability target, what would it be? Okay, maybe one more?
Sorry, they've just switched around. Could we get subsidised train travel to encourage staff away from using cars? We've seen punitive car parking charges, but a cheap alternative would do more to encourage staff to greener travel.
Okay, so balancing the need to drive with alternative incentives. So why don't we take those two? So why don't we start with that second one? I mean, I think this goes to the trade-offs, and obviously we've announced a new travel policy that includes changes to car parking, and Some people are very unhappy about it. Some people think we need to go harder on, thinking about alternative ways to get to campus. This is a classic trade-off, really difficult issue, trying to work through it as best we can. Carly or Julia, just a quick comment on that, and then maybe Mike, a new sustainability target. Is that something we should think about?
Yeah, I mean, you've covered the car parking and the travel plan stuff well there. The work that we've done has been about balancing different goals. There's been an equalities impact assessment that led to changes to try and balance those, sort of various views and impacts. I think the challenge around subsidising public transport, the majority of our staff come to work by active or public transport means. So from a purely environmental perspective, you aren't getting more carbon out of the system by further incentivising those people to do that.
It's about 70% or something?
Yeah, it would be very expensive in a time when the sector is, under financial difficulties, and I think it would be hard to justify, like, to our board and stuff. And it would be a decision about how we are engaging with staff. It wouldn't be an environmental measure, really, because there are so many staff already coming by those modes. I think that question is really about encouraging the 30% of staff who have permits onto those modes of travel. Well, you couldn't only subsidise those people that have been driving for many years. You would have to obviously do it for all staff. And environmentally, it's just not where, I don't think it's where you would spend the funds if you had them. And what we've tried to do with the policy is to get a sort of balance where the big intervention we were making around travel was we were making parking your car cheaper than public transport. So we were intervening in the system in a big way, and we wanted to tackle that as part of the environmental strategy to say, actually, we want to bring that on to more of a level playing field. And that's why for the lowest grades, in 3 years' time, it would be a £4 a day parking charge, which is the price of 2 single bus tickets today. And it's about 40% of the market rate, what we charge the public in 3 years' time. So we've tried to get a balance. I know that not everybody is happy about all the decisions we've made, but it's not been without that kind of discussion of compromise and equity.
Mike, do you just want to comment on maybe, is there a new target or goal we should have?
I mean, I think if you think about targets are about an aspiration, but also about data, right? And I think what we don't have actually is a lot of very good data. And so a lot of the focus on carbon that we've talked about today is because that's where the best data is. And I think as we look at expanding life cycle assessment or environmental impact assessment, looking across, let's say, 18 different categories, the trade-offs between those is going to be really important. And so I think that our target should be to expand our science-led targets to include all of those 18 factors. And of those factors, the one that keeps me up at night is definitely water. Potable water is going to globally be a really, really big concern. And so kind of coming back to the rainwater issue that we started with, I think having water usage target reduction is going to be key, but doing that in a way where we actually then go and contextualize it across the 18.
Fantastic.
Can I say one very quick thing I forgot to say about trains and buses? That as part of the travel strategy, there is a scheme where you can try the train or the tram for a month, and that is being paid for by the university. And so that's to try and help colleagues who've maybe not done that for a long time, or maybe had a bad experience at some point in the past, so they've always been using their car since, to try and give them a month of saying, actually, if you give it a whirl, is it, have you enjoyed it more? So it's not a subsidy for, just forever, but it's a month of free travel for active car park permit holders.
Right, okay, good. Okay, well, look, thanks very much. As I said, first of all, thank you, Julia, Carly, and Mike, very much. It's been great to have you here. Really appreciate the time and also the expertise you brought to the discussion. There's lots of work to go on from here, some fantastic ideas that have sort of got my head spinning a bit that we'll go away and think about in terms of the strategy. But also to everyone here, thanks for coming. Thanks for coming online as well. We've got the Menti questions. If there are questions in the room that you weren't able to ask, please just fire them through. You can write directly to me, Duncan Ivison, or President, or however you normally communicate with us, and we'll gather those up and think about how we respond. We might do another podcast. We might think of other ways. But other than that, maybe just join me in thanking the panelists for their contributions today. Thanks so much.